All right, I have 12:05, and to respect everybody's time, we'll get started. So good afternoon, everybody. First, let me just thank the commissioner and all of you for accommodating the change in schedule here. It's just the way things are in Trenton. Sometimes the commissioner gets called to the governor's office, but I'm glad that we're all here. And the commissioner and I kind of spoke about the format for today. And like we do with all of our conversation series, we want to keep this informal. We want to hear from all of you. Probably the best thing to do is you could always unmute yourself and ask a question, raise your hand or put it in a chat box and I'll read it. But we're going to tee up a few items and then we'll just do like a speed round. We'll spend about an hour with the commissioner and then we'll take it from there. This is being recorded. So if you don't have to take notes, but you want to listen to it, we are going to send this out on Friday. So, but before I do that, one of the things that we are proud of here is we keep these virtual events free to members, and that's through the generosity of our sponsors, and I'll read them out real quick. You know, I want to thank Tyler Evasano and Krantz Tech, law firm Whitestone Associates, Peak Environmental, Davy Resource Group, Skank Price, Alpha Analytical, K&L Gates, Pure Soil, and UEG Consultants. So I want to thank our sponsors. Also want to thank our team here, Kathy Tureen, one of our newer members, Julia, just joined us fresh out of college, Marist graduate. She handles social media and communications for us. So she's going to cover a lot of what we're going to do today on our platform. So again, thank you for all being here. Commissioner, a little bit of background on the commissioner, if you don't know. He started serving as commissioner in an active capacity in January of 2021. The Senate confirmed him in June of 2021. Prior to that, under former Commissioner McCabe, he served in a couple of capacities. Always been a friend to us. And Commissioner, I know last time I saw you in person was at our climate change event in August. So good to have you back. So let me tee it up. I guess the first question, Commissioner, is more or less on a staffing side of DEP and also the schedule, because I do get some emails and phone calls. I guess the staff back 5 days a week? Are they back? Is it hybrid? And if you can maybe give us an update on any key staff changes that have happened or upcoming.
Yeah, happy to do that. So first of all, thank you, Tony. I appreciate your friendship and your partnership, and that you organize forums like this one, because it's really important to me to hear directly from members of the regulated community. Of all stripes, right? There's many different regulated communities and with whom we engage. And so conversations that like you organize that are free flowing, that can sort of give me a view into what's going on for you all, because I firmly believe that we are all in this work of protecting and improving our environment together, and that includes the regulated community, the regulator. It includes the developers, and it includes the builders, and it includes the ENGOs, right? It's sort of all of the us, and I completely disagree with this sort of dichotomized view of you've sort of got the villains and the heroes, right? That is, you know, we love our false binary choices in America, but that is something I firmly think is unproductive. And as many of you know, I spent a good amount of my time serving industry in my career, and I appreciate that industry so often leads the way in many environmental protection endeavors. On DEP staffing, from an operations perspective, we're all back. It should be firing on all cylinders, and it's important to know when it isn't. Now we are on a hybrid schedule in terms of folks being folks having the ability to work from home 2 days a week. Not everyone chooses to. And that is typically a very consistent schedule. So if you are familiar with dealing with certain staff members on a regular basis, you might notice the rhythm at which they may be in Trenton versus not in Trenton. I also want to see us explore different uses of all of this space that we hold and or lease that has sort of a more flexible approach to, if folks are on their day where they're supposed to be in the office, they could be in any number of offices, right? Because we should be able to make our work portable for the most part. That doesn't work for everyone, right? But we're also going through slowly a transition of all of our phone numbers and phone lines, and it is a nightmare. I offered to our IT department to be the guinea pig who tries the new phone system. They begged me not to be, but I made them anyway because I want to know what the staff is experiencing, and it's not perfect. So you may experience a little bit of that. And so we should be at a steady clip. The metrics that I see suggest that we're at a steady clip. Now, you have to look at that from the perspective, of course, my predecessor was fond of saying that DEP is 2/3 the size it should be to do the job it has. And the legislature just keeps giving us more jobs. Doesn't take away any of the old jobs that maybe were done really well and not as necessary as maybe they used to be, but does add a lot of new jobs. And so we suffer from understaffing. There's not a question about that. Very honest and forthright about that. All of government does. We did, however, in the most recent budget, get the greatest growth in our staffing capacity that we've seen in well over a decade. And so we just went through a hiring blitz where 1,600 people applied for 150 jobs.
Wow.
So we'll be adding to our ranks in very key places that I think many in the different regulated communities will care about, especially given new regulatory endeavors like the environmental justice law and regulations. We will have more staffing to manage that. I know there's a concern about keeping the trains moving on time while we do better by our communities. We can do both. We have to do both. That's not to suggest there won't be hiccups and slowness as we find our way, but I am a bit of an efficiency nut. So I really care about that and I'm attentive to those things. If you have questions specifically about staffing in particular areas, I can try to do my best without my COO present. But the one thing that you should know, that my chief of staff, if you don't know Jane Rosenblatt, you should. She's everything. Is that I've been decried as being reorganization happy, right? Which maybe is good shorthand, and I'm sure some staff doesn't love that. But I think that it is incumbent upon us in government to continually re-examine how well we're doing the job, to ask ourselves hard questions about if we can be doing it better. And structural organization, as you all know, is a big component of how you do your job well or not, right? And so we've gone through a number of changes, some contemporaneous with retirements, because I'm not going to force it. I made the decision not to force folks that were near retirement to go with me on a journey that really is longer term. So what a couple of things that have changed. If you're familiar with dealing with our natural and historic resources program, it doesn't exist anymore. It has been split apart to better do its work. So natural and historic resources used to have all the parks, all the fish and wildlife, all of the wildlife management areas, all of the, my goodness, they're loud. Office of Natural Resource Restoration, green acres, all of the stuff that you might find on the federal level in a Department of Interior or in a Park Service or Fish and Wildlife or NIMS, right? Because DEP, if you liken us to the federal level, we're like 8 different agencies all crammed into one. There's only about 4 states in the country that do it this way. And having all of those things in one chain under one assistant commissioner wasn't as productive, in my opinion, as it could be. And so we've broken that up. We now have a new program That's called Community Investment in Economic Revitalization, because yes, we do that. And that is a combination of Green Acres, historic preservation, our community collaborative initiative, our local government services, our Office of Natural Resource Restoration, to help drive and steward the investments that DEP makes, because we invest a lot of money. And so also in there, baked into our community collaborative initiative is a facilitative force back to the programmatic functions of the brownfields program, because those things sort of all go together. So that is a new program. We reestablish watershed management. And so we have a program now, watershed and land management. All the land use related functions are within there, as well as stormwater related functions, watershed wide planning, taking some pieces out of water. We no longer have a compliance and enforcement program, not because we don't do compliance and enforcement, but because we're doing it now across the media areas, as opposed to in a standalone channel. So water enforcement is with the water program, right? Land use enforcement is with the land use program. And some programs always had their own enforcement, like site remediation. So we made that consistent. And then we've created the Office of Enforcement Policy, which is led by our Chief Enforcement Officer, whose job is to ensure consistency in compliance and enforcement approaches across all of the agencies, so that there's not one different approach to enforcement in land use than there is in site remediation, that we're achieving a better degree of consistency, and where there should be a divergence, that is reasoned divergence, as opposed to ad hoc decision making. And so that's been really important to me, to systemize things in that way. And the last thing to be mindful of is the breakup of what was site remediation and waste management. And so now what we'll have is contaminated site remediation and redevelopment. And that is what everyone probably has historically thought of as SRP. And so now it's CRS, and they don't have the waste functions. And we've taken the stationary source regulation and put it together with air, energy, and materials sustainability, or AIMS. And so that is the majority of your non-water stationary source permitting. So that is my vision. Reorganizations take time to implement. All of the new assistant commissioners for these areas are established. Elizabeth Dragon, who some of you may know, is the assistant commissioner for CIANJ, Community Investment in Economic Revitalization. David Haynes, pending his permanence, is assistant commissioner for contaminated site remediation and redevelopment. And Paul Baldoff, who you all know from the air and radiation world, has the Division of Sustainable Waste Management and Waste Enforcement. So those are sort of the big organizations.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner. So just going back to, I guess, David Hames, because I know the Assistant Commissioner for the new division there, he's not interim anymore, right? Is he now, or is he still interim?
Yeah, he's still in an acting capacity. All these things always take time.
Okay. All right. And there was a question in the chat. How many employees does the department have right now? Ballpark?
So it's always hard to calculate this, and I'll explain why, right? We have a certain number of on-budget FTEs, which is what people ordinarily will see. But we also have an hourly and temporary workforce that doesn't get counted in that number. Altogether, it's around 3,400 people.
Okay.
And in the summertime, it becomes 4,200 to 4,500 because of all the seasonal workforce that we bring on. So that's the number I sort of work with, somewhere
right
between 32 and 34 as sort of working people, as opposed to budgeted FTE levels.
Thank you. And just going back to enforcement, because I know I've gotten some emails and phone calls in terms of the enforcement culture Has it changed? I thought what you said was very important. So hopefully everybody understands that it looks like it's been decentralized and going back to the various programs. But is there still a sense of compliance assistance where if somebody
Yeah,
goes out
without
and
question.
okay,
And culture takes time to change, right? I wouldn't necessarily call it decentralized. It's sort of like the Federal Republic of enforcement, where there is a central organizing, policy setting, and guiding force that will also take on itself the most emergent and compelling enforcement challenges. But the reason, to my mind, to co-locate is to ensure a greater degree of compliance and technical assistance in order to achieve and sustain compliance, as opposed to a more sort of heavy-handed inspection, notice, penalty, fine structure, right? Now, of course, that is still necessary, but the goal is compliance, right? A penalty is not, it means nothing to me, truly nothing. What matters to me is compliance. And so we have all of course, the penalty structure regulations that we have to abide by. But what I'm hoping to achieve over time culturally is a more holistic assessment of a compliance need that is checklist driven where it needs to be, but not but where the checklist isn't the stool of the thing, right? The compliance, the get, right? I always talk to folks about going back to first principles. What is it that we're trying to do? And are we tripped up by the checklist? Are we tripped up by a very formulaic regulatory approach? What are we trying to do? We've always got to ask ourselves that question. That's what I want to be the motivating spirit of each of these reorganizations, compliance included.
thank you, Commissioner. Any questions from the group? I saw another one that popped into the chat as far as where are the gaps in terms of, hold on, where are the staffing gaps at DEP?
Some of the biggest issues are in site remediation.
Okay. Any other questions on enforcement, staff, reorganize? I think another thing that I wanted to kind of point out, Commissioner, is, I guess, just so everybody understands, the phones are being transitioned. So, you know, check the website for directories and any changes in phone numbers, right? Okay. Any other questions? And again, you could unmute yourself.
Tony, it's Michelle. I just have a quick comment. I want to thank the commissioner with regard to the update as it pertains to inspections and enforcement. The theme being, and during this conversation, is it's collaborative. And I think the regulated community, we really do appreciate that. We have seen a disconnect a little bit as we move forward, but knowing that that's on your agenda is we're very appreciative of that. So thank you.
Yeah, very much on the agenda. Culture is just hard to hard to change.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you think about compliance enforcement at DEP past, compliance and enforcement did three very discrete things, right? It did air to waste, and it did water, and not all the same, and not necessarily in keeping with changing imperatives of the base media program. Right, so there's a lot of tension there, and so co-locating with the base media program, right? The assistant commissioners there and I meet every single week, right? And we're going through all the things that matter, and so if compliance isn't in that same line, and if policy or approach or culture is trying to be changed, it's not getting all the way down, and that takes time, of course.
Thank you, Michelle. Real quick, and then we're going to try to move on to some other subjects. Are there any plans to bring in additional staffers to review RAPs? But also there was a question as far as when the website would be updated with the staff changes, or?
I don't know. I don't have specific plans to bring in a temporary workforce to resolve RAPs. Is that sort of the idea? I do have a pending briefing in the next week or so on the backlog issues. So that is something that we can reconnect about, Tony.
All right, thank you. Here's another one. Can you provide insight as to why there are? I'm going to get to the A901 issue, Tracy, so thank you. Maybe a good segue, Commissioner. And one of the issues I know I worked on with a lot of our members was the A901 issue. I know the governor signed the law extending it to when the regulations are going to be adopted. I was surprised, and I reached out to Janine McGregor and Mike Castry just to kind of check in and say, when are the stakeholder meetings going to happen again? And they had no plans to do it. And I wrote back to them saying that I think it's important. And I'll give you a couple of reasons why, Commissioner. I don't think we should wait until the draft rules are out because there's still a lot of unanswered questions. And I'll give you one where we actually talked to the Attorney General's office. Some companies go to this ESOP program where maybe they have some stock ownership to employees. One specific member has 30 employees. Maybe they get a percent or less of ownership. If you read the A901 rules, technically all 30 are key employees. They would have to go for background checks and be licensed. Makes business almost impossible to do. The Attorney General's office basically agreed. I think they only had one other issue like that. So I think there are real issues that we have to have a dialogue on before the draft rules come out. So, and again, I could follow up with Janine, but any thoughts on the A901 and why we're not having the stakeholder meetings anymore?
I imagine some of that is my fault and my reorganizational, the fault of my reorganizational imperatives in terms of timing. I believe that the rule proposal is targeted for the second quarter of next year. It would be appropriate, like a loop back is appropriate. There's not a question. So I'll pursue that conversation internally. Because if the stakeholder sessions from which we are deriving information, there have been distant in time, and there are open questions that there's thoughts on how we've resolved them. Some dialogue about that before a rule proposal goes out is appropriate. Just because no further meetings are planned doesn't mean they won't be planned. So I'll loop back on that in particular.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions about A901 before we move on? Because again, I know we want to get to a few more topics. If not, let's go to PFAS. I know PFAS is always in the news. I know that the interim soil standards came out. And again, I'm going to look at the membership here. If anybody wants to unmute and ask a question of the commissioner of the PFAS standards, please do so now or put it in the chat. But any comments, thoughts on PFAS? Again, the soil standards are, I guess, interim, they're effective. Anything else happening on the PFAS level in terms of water?
Oh my goodness, there's always stuff happening. So on the interims, that took us a while to get out. I think there's long been a yearning for us to get to completion on it. There was part of the delay in getting there is we wanted to be really confident in the science, and so we went through, and I imagine you'll see this on the webinar that will be held on November 10th, right? For folks interested in remediation and PFAS remediation in particular, it would be a mistake to miss the November 10th webinar, because that is where you'll see so much of the thinking behind it, the analyses that went into those area specific the area specific standards in particular. So I think that'll be helpful to learn more about. So I would absolutely say get to that if you all can. On the water side, And of course, we'll make it available electronically, right? I'm trying to get everybody into the habit of the type of engagement we do and the extent of the visibility of it and our transparency with how we arrive where we do. So I would say get to that. With respect to water, I think what's important to understand there is the ongoing EPA processes that are that bear on our approaches, right? So for those who are in the water sector, in drinking water in particular, I imagine that there is, and if there isn't, there should be a high degree of attention to what EPA plans to put out by the end of this year, right? EPA plans to do drinking water MCLs. Well, we already have we already have those drinking water MCLs. What happens to ours as a function of how low they go is a question. I did ask when EPA came out this summer with their health advisories that really pushed down the levels and the science that it relied upon in doing that. I've asked the Drinking Water Quality Institute to reevaluate our MCLs using the materials relied upon by EPA's Scientific Advisory Board. And I made that request, I think it was in July. So that is to be mindful of. I did also accept the Drinking Water Quality Institute's recommendation for 1,4-dioxane as well, right? So that is coming, and we're still in the process on the water side of getting our proposal for the New Jersey specific lead and copper rule in place for proposal.
Oh, just a couple of questions on PFAS. One is the survey that went out about a year or two ago. Is there plans to use the results to put PFAS standards in NJDEP permits, the JIPDES permits?
More work is necessary to get there. Certainly, I mean, and those who participated in that survey work, it's really appreciated. We're ahead of the curve on this issue, certainly ahead of the feds, ahead of most other states. And so there is additional surveying work that will be ongoing. The point of regulation on discharge is an interesting and rather complex one, right? Because is it the POTW? Is it the SIU? Right? So there are track down issues that we have to work on, and the Division of Drinking Water, the Division of Water Quality has put together a really fantastic presentation on the pathways. And so that is something that I'm sure they'd be happy to take meetings on with systems and regulated entities that are interested. And maybe it's something that there should be a webinar about. That's a good note for me to take away. If folks are interested enough in that proposition, I think that's something that's worthwhile.
Yeah, and Commissioner, I'll follow up with you with an official invitation, but we started an emerging contaminants work group here at CIANJ, and we've been meeting for about 8 months, once a month, where we have speakers, water, insurance people, just kind of talking about the complexities. But love to, invite you and whoever. I'm not sure who's in charge of the Division of Science and Research, if there still is one. But again, I'll follow up with you on that. But I just wanted to let you know that we are working on that, just to try to collect data.
You need Janice Bogle and her team to be a lot more than you need me.
All right.
Because they're very steeped in. We got together on it around 2 months ago as they were taking their next steps in the furthering of the sequence of work with the POTWs on their sampling imperatives, and then how the information that was obtained from the first round is going to be moved forward. But the steps to get to actionable permit limitations, right? We know we need to, right? There's not a question, but it has to be really thoughtful.
Thank you, Commissioner. And again, I'm looking at the chat. Let me just go through a couple real quick. And this is again on PFAS. Will it ever be possible to establish a stakeholder process to discuss the implementation of PFAS standards and all the associated issues with the investigation and remediation of contaminated sites?
It certainly sounds reasonable. Certainly sounds reasonable. I think that's a good question to raise on the 10th at the webinar
Okay,
for the CRS team. Yeah.
all right. Another one, appreciate that, Commissioner. Do you have any comments on the pending Legionella, legislation?
I do not comment publicly on legislation because the
Standard
legislature
response.
has got to be able to do the legislature has got to be able to do its work. But I imagine that, oftentimes what will happen is, as many of you all know, the legislators that are sponsoring these initiatives will often bring, everybody to the table. I don't know if that's occurring on the regional legislation. But I wouldn't know. It potentially could be appropriate. I think that it may be. I remember hearing some concerns about scope and whether scope was correct. But I've not had my head in it.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Sticking with site remediation too, and this kind of delves into NJDEP. Is there anything, I guess, the administrative orders, the executive order, with site remediation and sustainability of cleanups?
Yeah, this is important to me, and quite honestly, it should be important to everyone. Right, that if you're counseling clients on the resilience of particular remediation features, I think it's appropriate to encourage them to encourage your clients to think, and your members to think about what the changing climate conditions of New Jersey mean for the long-term success of institutional and engineering control, more so engineering controls. I think that we will find our way to a regulatory place there. It's going to be a while, right? So, NJDEP it's not one thing, right? I intend for it to be an enduring commitment for as long as I'm here, that we continually examine in each of those chains, right? Our NJDEP has two pieces for those who don't know, right? It has CPR, the climate pollutant reduction stream of regulatory reforms, and it has REAL, the resilient environments and landscapes chain of regulatory reforms. Right now for REAL, we're working within the suite of land use related regulations. But in that chain, we get to site remediation too. And the important thing to think about is how our tech regs cross back to our flood hazard regs, to our stormwater regs. Those two will see immediate change, right? So that is something to be really attentive to. And ultimately, specific changes on the site remediation side would come. And what we've been working on is sort of a blueprint for how and when we begin teeing those things up. I would love for DEP to put out a broader climate action plan as a sort of work of strategic thinking of here are all the things we need to do. Some of them we may not get for the time that I am privileged enough to sit in this seat. But it can be at least a point of reference moving forward as well. So I'd love to be able to get something like that out on the street, if not by the end of the year, early next.
Thank you. Let's go to environmental justice. I know we joined a few other business groups, submitted extensive comments. I guess the comments are under review. Anything you could opine on about EJ and where it stands right now?
The lawyers tell me not to opine because I'm no longer a lawyer and I can't be my own. So that said, we're certainly endeavoring to get the rule finalized and out for adoption. We did receive a lot of detailed comments, and then we received an avalanche of the sort of more wrote like or Me Too comment, right? Where it's this, a more formulaic that you can put into buckets. And then there are certain very engaged constituencies like yours that have more detailed comments. Those are being poured through right now by the AG's office, by DEP. I think we'll get through them all by the end of the year. At least that is my request of the team. So we'll hopefully meet that. But I think the biggest takeaway, and if I have an opinion on anything, it's that this is not something to be scared of, right? And I think there's a lot of that out there. And if you've spent any time with EJ Map, right, the tool that we put out in beta, the Environmental Justice Mapping Assessment and Protection tool, I think it is a really great place to ground yourself in the conditions of any host community, and can paint a picture of that for you on how easy it would be to meet the requirements of the EJ rule. And we've been doing our AO process in the meantime, and by and large, that has been moving forward without disturbing the plans of an applicant, by and large. And so I think that once we have the structure of the rule in place, we'll achieve that better, and it will become more efficient as we get through it. Right in the beginning, it's always a little harder and a little slower. But I think I think EJ Map is an incredible resource. And even if your facility, you're looking at a new facility or an expanded facility, even if it's not subject to the 8 narrow, right? The EJ law is actually pretty narrow. If it's not subject to those 8 categories of facilities, it's still worth looking at. It's still worth that measure that I know so many of our companies in New Jersey subscribe to or aspire to, which is to be a good neighbor. You can see how you can do that better just by looking at EJ Map, and it goes so far with the community, and it could just make for good relationships to figure out a way to put it in practice.
Thank you. Let's go. I'm going to go back to site remediation. And I think no one would argue that when the LSRP program came into existence in the late 2000s, I guess 2009, it's been a success. Basically, the professionals are licensed. They have the ability to kind of expedite the cleanups. And again, I've gotten a few emails and I've had a few conversations with members saying that there seems to be an erosion of the use of best professional judgment. That there seems to be, and I hate to use the word clawback, but I'll use that word for lack of a better word, that there just seems to be this pushback on a lot of the decisions. And Commissioner, and again, this is way above my head, but things like alternate fill and what to do and what not to do at a site. It seems like, even though you're licensed, whether you're a PE or an LSRP, it's still, you got to get approval from the department. Any thoughts, comments as to, how we can address that?
Yeah. So the first step in addressing that is one of the reorganizational elements that I mentioned, that the service of the board not being done by the program. I think that's really important, right? And so now the LSRP board and its staff is in the commissioner's office, right? And so that I think is important, both from a process perspective and for the degree of distance that I think can help to meet both ends and be a mediator of issues that can come up as between the licensed community and the regulators in the program itself. So much of what the commissioner's office does at DEP is to be an arbiter that focuses on that first principle. And sometimes, shockingly, what happens in government is folks are very much in their silo, and that's okay. We need silos to do specific things, right? But sometimes it loses view of the field, right? And instead of worrying about the field, you're worrying about every blade of grass. And so my hope is that that is a step forward to create a better dialogue between the commissioner's office. Paul Stofa, if you do not know him, is now my designee that sits on the board for me. And so my hope is to begin to tease that apart. And I have folks engaging in some internal discussions around that commentary, Tony, that you mentioned, because I've heard it too. Look, there's always multiple, there's always multiple perspectives and vantage points to a particular issue, whether it's site remediation or elsewhere. I hate to use the word sides because the table is round and it is large. But having a steward of that function that is independent of the program itself, I think is important. It's just a matter of governance, and I'm kind of a good governance nut. But the other piece is to what I've asked David and Gwen Zervis to examine, and we're going to hold a series of discussions about, is we need a retrospective on the onset. We need a retrospective internally on the LSRP program. And because it grew up over the last 10 years, meaningfully in the last 10 years. And that is an important inflection point. To ask yourselves questions about process and the ways that we're doing things. And are we focusing too much on certain blades of grass, say within the Bureau of Inspection and Review? I don't know, because I've never worked in the Bureau of Inspection and Review. So, but those questions are important from a managerial perspective, and I've asked folks to evaluate them.
Thank you, Commissioner. We got about 10 more minutes left. I got one more topic, and then I really want folks to be engaged. Again, use the chat. There's a couple of chat questions that I'll get to, but on the flood hazard rules, I know that was a contentious issue back in late spring, and I participated in one of the meetings this week. And just so everybody knows, it looks like the rules are going to be published draft in December, so there is going to be an opportunity to comment, which again, thank you, Commissioner, for that and your team. But going back to, not sure if this is too far into the weeds. I'm just looking at the chat. Going back to enforcement, there was a question about the holistic approach to compliance, a goal of environmental and stakeholder protection. And they're asking, why is there a hurdle to it in terms of reaching that point?
Yeah, so I think the hurdle is like anything else, that we're used to doing things a certain way and change is hard, right? You mentioned flood hazards and contention. I don't believe there's contention. I think there is worry that creates a perceived tension when actually there at least shouldn't be one. And the same is true of internal change, because change is hard. It's very human for change to be hard. The idea of building things a little higher is a change, and one could experience the prospect of that change as a dangerous or potentially undermining thing. So too can you experience reorganizational change and organizational culture change as a potentially dangerous and undermining thing. And so it's just a function of change internally. And I don't know that there's anything that the regulated community can do other than to be patient where it's appropriate to do so, and to level things up when you're not getting appropriate answers. People have bosses.
Well, I want to play on that, Commissioner, because I think this is important and it cuts across all the programs. Because a lot of times I'll get phone calls saying that there's a dispute with a permit writer or an inspector or a case manager. They're not sure what to do, right? Something could be subjective. But what's your advice? Is that they should contact their supervisor, send an email? What's your advice? If there's a dispute,
I think that it's sensitive and case specific. The number of times that folks will not come to me about something, but potentially go to my boss is unhelpful, right? It's unhelpful for everyone. So you have to use that judiciously. And there are times where it's appropriate, right? It's a matter of, I won't call it exhausting your remedies, but to work collaboratively. But there comes a point where perhaps you've not gotten an answer, or it just doesn't make any sense, and you're owed sensible, timely answers. And when you don't get them, it's a matter of leveraging the relationship and where to go, right? So many of you will have relationships with staff that I don't even know, right? And so how you may go to someone's supervisor or talk to their bureau chief or talk to a director, right? It's got to be about the level of the issue, right? What seems like a major policy change should never be made without a director involvement at a minimum. So it's really about the type of the issue.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I'm sorry if that's too vague. It's
No. I mean, that's fair. I just think that's a scenario that happens more often than you would think. But again, we have a few more minutes, and don't be shy. I know we had the chat, but anybody want to unmute and ask the Commissioner any questions? Assuming that I'm looking at my notes here. I think we covered a lot of.
I see. I see the question here from Beth Hyde. There is not a question that the DEP staff know the impressive stats of the cleanups. There's not a question. They herald the impressive stats of the cleanups and the resolution of backlogs, the amount of RAOs that have been achieved site-wide or independent area. There's not a question that they know that. However, when you're in the silo, you might focus too much on counting how many things you reviewed, right? So and I'm not saying that happens because I don't spend time in the silo, but I could imagine it happening. And those are questions that we have to ask ourselves.
Any other questions? Thanks, Commissioner. Ask it now. Oh. Hold on. This was a private one to me, Commissioner. Hold on. It's a big one. So sorry about that.
And I don't mind hard questions.
Okay. Let me read it. The DEP will only allow a lab to be certified for one user defined PFAS method, either the lab's own user defined method or the EPA draft 1633 method. This is due to limitation in the software for certifying labs. I'm just trying to see what the question is. I'm not sure what the question is about certified labs.
It sounds like one I would not.
Hold on. Can I clarify this?
Yeah, go ahead, Ralph.
Hey, sorry. There's a lot to type, and I apologize. So I'm Ralph Kosis with Alpha Analytical. Good morning, Commissioner, and thanks for speaking with us today. So the issue here is that this has been a fast moving target for everybody, all throughout the industry. And as you know, there wasn't an EPA method for non-drinking water. And the EPA and DOD are rushing and working hard on validating a method, right? Okay, so prior to this, the labs were able to be certified for their own developed what they're called a user-defined method. However, the department came out sometime in the summer and said, "Hey, you know what? We'll accept also the EPA 1633 method, which will now handle all the other matrices other than drinking water, which would be non-potable water, solids, biosolids, tissues, et cetera, et cetera." Now, each of those methods are important for, I think, the labs as well as the practitioners, the LSRPs, because you never know what you're going to come up against. And each offer different compound lists, lower reporting limits. There's things that could come into play here. Recently, I've been kind of going through the gyrations of working with the department QA and the site remediation group, that they've told me that we can only be certified for one or the other because of a limitation in the software. And that limits our ability to service the RPs and the LSRPs, and then in turn, them serving their customers, so their clients, right? So I just—
It sounds like something that you should talk through with whomever gave you that answer. You mean quality assurance, which is within Division of Science and Research.
Our option is this: one or the other, not both. And both is in my mind, in my position in dealing with this for a long time, is it's a kind of a disservice to everybody, because it would be, if we have more tools in the toolbox, right, we could provide better data to the LSRPs, who could then move cases along for remediation or site development, et cetera, et cetera. So is there some mechanism that you could employ before the EPA comes out with a final version? Because once the EPA comes out with their final version, I think this all goes away. But until then, could we come up with some manual process that allows us to develop another tool in the toolbox and be certified for both, I guess, is my overall question.
The honest answer is that I don't know. I see value in that, the imperative that you're stating, which is more tools in the toolbox, better service of the client, and the client is facilitating the environmentally protective thing. Not all that. I'll put this in the box of I went to law school because I can't do math and I definitely can't do computers. So, but I think this is one where like Tony, if you can roll it up, we put it in your follow-up notes to me, and then we'll get someone to look at it. And look, my overall view of the world is, we don't exist to give people no's. We exist to find the right yes. And so is the no you got, is it well reasoned? I don't know, but it's worthwhile enough to ask, and I appreciate your reasoning.
Thank you.
So we're almost at the end here, Commissioner. I forgot to ask you about the greenhouse gas rule. Any news on that?
Yeah, that's close. That's really close. And you're talking about the stationary source rule in particular, right?
Correct.
There's a couple of other ones that we've got cargo handling, but you mean the stationary source with the boiler one, and there's been some concerns about the boiler piece. Taking those very, very, very seriously, and we are going to loop that.
Okay. So with that,
no, we're not going to surprise you when something suddenly came out. There's enough. There's enough that was raised that I feel like we have to be responsive to.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. At this point, if we could just have our sponsors say hello. Again, we don't have to. Just want to give you the opportunity to kind of weigh in, ask the Commissioner anything. Ralph, I'll start with you since Alpha Analytical is one of our sponsors. Anything else that you want to raise?
No, I just appreciate being a part of the call today. One point I guess I'd like to make is that, as you had mentioned that you have a committee that gets together to talk about different regs and regulations, and PFAS is a hot topic. I would implore, you and also the department to include a lab in those groups, because there's, as servicing, the whole big process here, a lot of that starts with us. And it would be great to, be a part of that. And I'm sure you get a lot of volunteers from the various laboratories. But other than that, just glad to be a part of this the program.
Thank you, Ralph.
appreciate that, Ralph. And I will tell you that there are 36, I think now 37 boards, councils, commissions, and advisory groups that exist to advise DEP on things. And if you go to our homepage, you will, and I think it's under the About Us column, you will find the list of those boards, councils, and commissions, and there may be ones that meet your what you just raised, the issue you just raised, and offer your thoughts. Our Deputy Chief of Staff, Megan Brunati, is the keeper of the boards, councils, commissions, advisory groups, etc.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. I know Eric White couldn't be here today, but we thank him. UEG. Michelle from Pure Soil.
Yes, this is Michelle Zalisi with Pure Soil Division of Earl. Obviously, we manage contaminated material throughout New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. So one is, I'm so glad to see that the theme here is collaboration. We also have an asphalt plant here on New Jersey too. So we've been working with the department for a really long time. But moreover, the PFAS soil has definitely been impacting our industry, and working with, as a former consultant and with consultants in New Jersey. I'm looking forward to working with the department on how we're going to manage those types of materials, meaning specifically soil, within New Jersey. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Michelle.
I
Yeah.
acknowledge the challenge and I welcome the collaboration.
Gail from K&L Gates. Or Brian.
I think Brian's gone. Hi, Gail Condonello, K&L Gates. Just want to thank you for your time, Commissioner. It's very informative and we appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you, Gail.
Hey, Gail, you ever think when we did that environmental justice panel
Yeah, we did all those years ago.
about
Good
6 years
memory.
ago, that we'd be where we are today? Go New
I
Jersey.
know, it's amazing, right?
Thank you, Gail. I thought I saw Jeff Campbell from Peak. Is Jeff still on?
Yeah, I'm here, Tony. Hello, everyone. Not a lot to contribute today, but I'll just thank CIANJ for putting this on and the commissioner for his time, because these kinds of exchanges are really important to keep us informed as the regulated community. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. I did see Tom from Whitestone. Tom Muzo, is Tom still on? Anybody from Whitestone? Okay, sorry about that. Jim from Tyler Avasano. I think I saw Jim. There he is. Hey, Jim. You're on mute.
Sorry, hi everyone. Thanks, Tony. Jim Aversano, Tyler Aversano and Krantz. Just want to say thank you, Commissioner, for your insight and your candor today. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. Finally, two more. Just anybody.
From me, Jim.
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner. I'm sorry.
I just said say hi to everybody over there for me, Jim. It's good to see you.
Will do. Thank you, Commissioner.
Anybody from Skink Price on? All right, and then finally, anybody from Davie Resource Group on?
Yeah, Tony, hi, this is Bill Mackel, the Davie Resource Group. I just want to say thank you to the association and to the commissioner for sharing his insights. It's always very helpful to have these conversations with the people at DEP who actually know what's going on. So thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And with that, Commissioner, again, thank you on behalf of everybody. I know you're a busy guy and appreciate you spending an hour with us. And I want to thank all of our sponsors and everybody. Again, this is recorded. We'll send it out and look forward to working with you, Commissioner, and your team. So thank you.
Thank you for organizing this. We're all busy people, and your time is as valuable as mine, and I appreciate that you've spent it with me. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe. Bye-bye.